Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. When a place has been around as long as Provincetown, we're bound to end up with a lot of lore, stories, and whispered rumors. The Provincetown Art Colony has attracted many stars and luminaries over the last century and a quarter. So a fair number of our stories revolve around these celebrities of art, literature, and show business. Have you heard, for example, about the time when Anthony Bourdain was working at the Lobster Pot restaurant right here in Provincetown? Well, that's going to be in a movie soon, so you'll find out. What about the story about Billie Holiday performing one of her very last shows at the Atlantic House nightclub right here in Provincetown? Or the story about Eugene O'Neill's house falling into the ocean? And I read somewhere once that Norman Mailer was arm wrestling with Robert Motherwell, but we don't know who won that one. And then when Jennifer Coolidge came to town last year for about 2 weeks, she left a long trail of news stories behind her. But one of the celebrities who arguably spawned the most stories and rumors about his time in Provincetown is Tennessee Williams. Throughout the 1940s, the author and playwright was a regular visitor to our little town, and reportedly produced some of his most iconic works here. And 80 years later, the stories about Tennessee Williams in Provincetown are still circulating. But how many of them are based on fact? And how many are just simple deformations or fabrications? So to untangle the stories of Tennessee Williams in Provincetown, we have with us today a Tennessee Williams expert, Mr. Jef Hall-Flavin. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very happy to see you here.
You too.
So let's start by talking about you. Who is Jef Hall-Flavin?
I am a theater director and Provincetown resident. I used to live here full time, and then in 2018 left to go to London, and now I'm here part time. But I still have a home here and still consider Provincetown my home. I got my start in Minnesota at the Guthrie Theater and went on to work in Washington, D.C. at the Shakespeare Theater. So I worked in theaters large and small. I had a small queer theater company in Minneapolis. And throughout the last 30 years, I've also been an educator and a producer and an administrator. And now I'm a researcher. I teach in London.
For those who might not know who Tennessee Williams is, can you tell us in general, who is Tennessee Williams and why is he important to talk about?
Well, I'm admittedly biased, but I think he is America's Shakespeare. The reason I think that he's important to talk about is because he really changed the landscape of American drama, not just here, but also in many countries worldwide. So I consider him the great American playwright of the 20th century. It's not often that a playwright affects culture as much as Tennessee Williams, especially because a lot of his plays were made into Hollywood films. And so it became part of the vernacular of 20th century drama, but also 20th century arts and letters and sort of cultural themes. He really tapped into something in America.
And can you name some of those plays?
Well, sure. I mean, A Streetcar Named Desire is the one that comes to mind with Stanley Kowalski, and it really kind of shaped an entire generation's psyche of what masculinity is and what sort of the Hollywood film is. What made his name is The Glass Menagerie, which is kind of an autobiographical play that takes place in St. Louis. So those two, hopefully, audiences will know, but also Night of the Iguana and Suddenly Last Summer, just to name some of his more well-known ones.
Yeah, because there's a lot of them, right?
Right.
So if we go back to 1940, when Tennessee Williams was 1940s, when Tennessee Williams was coming to Provincetown, how would you describe him as a person back then?
Well, it's hard to encapsulate an entire decade.
Okay.
So if we start...
Well, let's talk about his first visit. Like,
right.
It was 1940, right?
Right?
The first time he came here. So who was Tennessee Williams when he first showed up in Provincetown?
Well, he was restless, on the verge, anxiety-ridden, he had this desperate desire to do something new in the theater. He had this a really driven. Well, he considered himself a writer since he was 13, so he was a writer, and he had attended university at the University of Iowa playwriting program. He had to school in St. Louis at Washington University. So he was studying writing, and he was fortunate at the time to have an agent, and so he was trying his luck in New York. But his state of mind, I think, was yearning and a bit desperate, perhaps. In short, he was a serious writer with a poet's heart and a horny libido.
How old was he at that point?
He was 29 in 1940.
Well, yeah, did they get horny at that age?
Right.
Yeah.
But he had also he sort of got a lift with a Rockefeller Foundation grant in 1939. He lied about his age because it was for people 25 and younger. So
Okay.
so it was a bit of a secret that he was 29.
And why did he come to Provincetown? What brought him here?
It was his agent, in short. But I think for a fuller answer, you have to understand that he never really liked to stay in one place for more than 3 months or so. And he had been in New York for 4, and he was, at the time, his agent got him a scholarship to the New School at this playwriting workshop, which was full of influential people. So it was kind of important for him to be there. And he had submitted a play to the Theater Guild, and they were thinking about doing it, and he wanted to go to Acapulco. So he wanted to get out of New York. He was getting restless, as I said, yearning for something else, yearning for a place to write. He was going to go to Acapulco on April 5th. But just before that, the Theater Guild said, we would like to do your play. So he had to cancel that trip and do some rewrites in May and early June. And he was desperate to get out of New York. So his agent said, well, why don't you go to Provincetown? You can write there and make rewrites, and you'll still be within, shouting distance of New York.
So was he already well known at that point? You said he had a grant, he had a play that was about to be staged. Was he a known name, or was he still very much an emerging, upcoming playwright?
He was unknown.
Unknown.
At that time, he had 2 plays produced by amateur theater groups in St. Louis. These were full-length plays. I think he had a 1-act also produced. But as far as his major works, they call them his apprentice plays, Candles to the Sun, and one other one that escapes my memory. But he was published at age 17 for his poetry and short stories. So he this is what I say, he had a poet's heart. He really was a poet. And I think that when I said before that he's America's Shakespeare, I think that's why he endures. It's because his writing is not directly topical. It's always political in some obscure way, but it's always universal because it's poetic. His language and his imagery, he writes through imagery. And I think that's very unique in his ability to draw characters and still maintain kind of a poetry of the theater.
So he was also writing poetry at that point?
Oh, yes. In fact, in 1940, that's what he was writing.
Now, here in Provincetown, as I said, we have all these stories. And one of the stories that circulates very often is, oh, Tennessee Williams wrote here. And there's a lot of places in town that say that Tennessee Williams lived there and worked there. So what's the actual story? Did he live in all these different places, or...
Yes.
Yes, okay.
The answer is yes and no. It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
He made... In the 1940s, he came in 1940, 1941, 1944, and 1947. So 4 trips altogether, some longer than others. The first trip in 1940, he was going to stay 2 weeks. He ended up staying almost 7. So obviously, Provincetown had an influence on him. But he was living on $2 a day. He was...
Was that a lot or very little back then?
That wasn't a lot.
It wasn't a lot back then.
No. I mean, he came up without a typewriter because he thought he was only going to stay a week or 2. It was just a getaway. And he was writing by hand, but he quickly ran out of money. And
pencils.
Pencils, exactly. So he would go down to the pier and hope that fishermen would be kind to him and throw a fish his way. And he was washing dishes as kind of a community effort. So he would wash dishes, somebody else would provide the food. And at the time, Joe Hazen, who was a dancer from New York, a ballet dancer, and another dancer named Kip Kiernan were living at Captain Jack's Wharf. The two-story smokehouse in the kind of the center of the pier.
Captain Jack's Wharf, for those who don't know, is in the west end of town. It's an actual wharf, and it has all these little cabins on it, and
Right.
it's been around for decades, for a very long time. It's very historic.
Yeah, I think it's been there for over a century.
Okay.
So that's one of the most sort of famous places that he lived. But he lived up and down Commercial Street at many addresses, some of which we know and some we don't know. He lived at guest houses like Valentine's Guest House, which is no longer here. He lived in the East End. He lived in the West End. He lived in a cabin, and he wrote every morning.
Did he live in one of the dune shacks?
No, he did not live in a dune shack
Okay.
on the dunes. He lived in a little cabin near the dunes in 1944, but he did visit a dune shack overnight, and there's documented
Okay.
evidence of this in a letter. But he didn't. We don't think he wrote anything there. If he did, he would have just been writing that the next morning, because he usually wrote in the morning. But no, he didn't live in a dune shack.
Because that's one story that we hear very often, that
Mhm.
Tennessee Williams sat in that shack and wrote a streetcar named Desire. And we also hear that he was writing at the little bar at the Atlantic House.
Nope.
Nope. Okay. So, yeah, we're debunking all
yeah.
these stories
Well,
now.
right. Well, I mean, if we go through chronologically,
Yeah.
well, your first question was, did he write something famous here?
Yes.
What famous works did he
Mhm.
write here? And the work that made him who he was the Glass Menagerie, and that he finished in Provincetown, and he wrote in a letter to his roommate in New York and a very good friend of his, Donald Wyndham. He wrote, "I finished The Gentleman Caller." Then he quickly retitled it. He called it The Fiddle in the Wings, and then he sent it off to his agent. And this was in July 1944. And he didn't think anything of it. He had to write it because he wanted to get his sister on the page. And he didn't think that anyone would be interested in the subject matter, and he wanted to get on to more important things. But he wrote it and he sent it off. In October of that year, it was optioned. It opened in December in Chicago and on Broadway in 1945, and ran for 2 years. And that was finished here in Provincetown in 1944. But just to say that he finished something here doesn't necessarily mean that he wrote all of it here. So you're a painter. You have a studio. So you can trace the provenance of most of your pieces to your studio at a particular time and place.
Them.
Yeah.
Yeah. For now.
And not every artist is like that, but most artists, visual artists, are like that. With writing, it's different, especially if he traveled a lot. So it's very difficult to say what was written where, because it was all being written all the time. Not only that, but it was iterative. So a short story would become a play, or a character or a scene from a story would end up in a play, or a short play would become a long play with a different title. So the scholarship over the last 20 years has been really painstaking and try to figure out what he wrote when. And we have some good information on that. But he was an artist, so he was always writing. And he was almost manic about having to write every day. With that knowledge, we can claim The Glass Menagerie, A Streetcar Named Desire, Summer and Smoke, Eccentricities of a Nightingale, and Provincetown is also where he worked on early drafts of what became Suddenly Last Summer and Night of the Iguana. So these really big titles that he's known for really can trace their roots back here, but in a different form.
Since we know that a lot of these things were at least partially composed here, can we see any elements of Provincetown in his writing, either in terms of characters, locations, events, feelings? Does Provincetown show up in his writing?
Absolutely.
In what way?
I think if your listeners need to know one thing about Provincetown, it's that this is where Tennessee Williams fell in love for the first time and got his heart broken. And I think that made an indelible mark on him. So there are 2 plays set specifically in Provincetown, and they are probably his most autobiographical works. One is called The Parade, and the other is called Something Cloudy, Something Clear. I had the good fortune to co-direct the world premiere of The Parade, which he began in 1940, finished in 1962, and then it sat dormant, never published and never performed until long after his death. And we did the premiere here in 2006. It takes place on the dunes, in sight of a lighthouse, at this fictional platform where they drop the mail from a helicopter. It's a love triangle. He's in love with this dancer, and he's an aspiring writer. And there's a woman who's in love with him. He's in love with the dancer. So it's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a beautiful story that got expanded in 1980. These two plays are like bookends to his life. So 1940 and 1980, 81 is when he was writing Something Cloudy, Something Clear, which is a full-length play, but takes place in a dune shack, and it has all of the hallmarks. Without mentioning Provincetown specifically, the setting's clear. It's a lighthouse, the sound of the waves, a falling down shack, the Boston Ferry is going by. There's even a dune taxi. So, so it's very reminiscent of Provincetown.
Well, the dune taxis are now the dune tours. That's how they started. There's a company in town here called Arts Dune Tours. They've been around since 1946, if I remember well. And they started as dune taxis. They would take people from the town to the beaches on the Atlantic side or to the dune shacks. And I drove for them for a summer in 2019. And when you learn to drive for the dune tours, you have to sit in the other tours' trucks and listen to what they say and then try to learn the stories. And when I was doing that, sitting in the trucks, I heard so many different variations on this one story about Tennessee Williams. The story is about Marlon Brando coming to Provincetown to audition for Tennessee Williams for his role in A Streetcar Named Desire. Depending on the truck I was sitting in, Marlon Brando was hiking his way through the dunes to a dune shack, or he was meeting him at the A house downtown, or he came to his house and fixed his toilet. There were so many different variants on this story. We know that Marlon Brando came to Provincetown to audition, but what is the real story here?
The real story has nothing to do with the dune shack.
Okay, good.
At the time, this was...
Don't tell that to the dune tour drivers.
I'm happy to.
Okay.
I'm happy to. Luckily, Euphoria, he did visit Euphoria. That is a dune shack.
Yes.
That's the one he stayed overnight in and went out, to visit a friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the dune shacks have interesting names. One is called Euphoria.
Right. So that is true.
Mm-hmm.
We know that from either a postcard or a letter. But he was, this is 1947, so he's probably the most famous playwright in America at the time. And he rented a house. He had a car. He had the means now. It's 1947. He's not living on $2 a day. He has a boyfriend, and he's got a house that he's renting, and it's at 773 Commercial Street. So that's pretty far in the East End.
All the way in the East End, almost in Truro.
Yeah. Marlon Brando was given $20 in New York by Elia Kazan, who was directing A Streetcar Named Desire, and he wanted him to go up to meet Tennessee Williams, who was in Provincetown. He spent the $20 because he had no money, and so he hitchhiked, and it took him a few days to get there, and he arrived with what Williams described as some chick.
Okay.
And he was walking up and down the beach inquiring about where Tennessee Williams was. And so finally, there's no telephones, there's no cell phones, of course. So he's just walking up and down the beach asking if people know where Williams lived. And finally, he made it to 773 Commercial Street, where the electricity had failed. A fuse went out, and the toilet was not working. One of the pipes was clogged.
Okay, so that part of the story is real.
It's real.
There is a toilet in the story. Okay.
There is a toilet. And at the time, both Williams and his boyfriend, Pancho Rodriguez, were being visited by Margot Jones, who was a theater director who co-directed The Glass Menagerie, and her sidekick. So there were four of them, and they were all shitting in the woods.
Okay.
Because there was no toilet.
There's no toilet. Okay.
And so Marlon Brando arrives, and he says, why are there no lights? And he said, well, the electricity's gone. So he basically just put a penny behind the fuse, and the lights came back on. And he unclogged whatever was clogged with the toilet, and then he auditioned. So he just did a reading, and about 10 minutes later, Margot Jones, who was a loud, brash Texan woman, said, "This is the best reading I've ever heard. You've got to call immediately." And I think 3 days later, he wrote a letter casting him.
And one of the stories I heard, one variance of this story is that since he was arriving in the house and he was doing all this handiwork, he took his shirt off and he was in a tank top. And that's what inspired Tennessee Williams to put him in a tank top in the play. Does that have any, that hold any water?
In my imagination, that's exactly what happened.
Okay.
But that's not what Tennessee Williams wrote. And other eyewitnesses and, all the research I've done don't talk about what he was wearing.
Okay.
But Williams did say that he was one of the most beautiful men he'd ever seen.
And another part of the story linking to this is saying that Brando stayed around and he had a love affair with Tennessee Williams for the next few weeks.
Nope.
Okay.
No,
we're debunking all this stuff now.
Williams didn't fool around with actors.
Mhm.
And I think he probably wanted to. I mean, who wouldn't?
Whoever.
I mean,
yeah.
If you've ever seen Marlon Brando in 1947, who wouldn't? But the sleeping arrangements were that Brando and Margot Jones slept in twin cots, and we don't think they did anything. Although, Brando was quite a womanizer, so who knows?
Was anything ever staged here back then? But back in the stories, in the 1940s, he was creating all this work here, but was he staging anything here?
No. He didn't really come to Provincetown for that. I believe it was 1946, he did the Glass Menagerie, but he was on Nantucket at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So he wouldn't have seen that production. He didn't come here every year. He skipped a year. He went to Nantucket a couple of times.
And you mentioned that he was here with a boyfriend, Pancho Rodriguez. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the stories that circulate still today around Provincetown about Tennessee Williams is about his love affairs. That he was very popular with the boys at the Atlantic House, that he brought a lot of men to Provincetown. Do you have any facts to corroborate these stories?
Yes. In fact, there's a whole play written about it called Rancho Pancho. And
that's what he called his house, right?
Well, that's what they were calling it that summer. Okay. I don't think anyone calls it that anymore. But 773 has a plaque on it saying Tennessee Williams lived here. So you can see the plaque.
And that's what he called Rancho Pancho.
Rancho Pancho.
So let's get back to his love affairs.
Okay, so I don't know how many years they were seeing each other, but a couple of years, I think, off and on. And Pancho had a really violent temper, a flash temper. And I think in some ways Williams found that exciting. And he liked his companionship, and he was a good lover. And, so there were a lot of reasons that I think that they were well suited. Many people say, and I think that there's a lot of evidence for it, that Pancho Rodriguez was the Stanley Kowalski, essentially.
Okay.
And in one draft of the play, actually, he's Hispanic. But they didn't think that would sell on Broadway, or they would be able to do that on Broadway at the time, so they made him Polish. So there is a lot of evidence that his experience with Pancho Rodriguez turned into the character of Stanley Kowalski. So that's kind of the backdrop. And they weren't necessarily exclusive, but let's just say that Pancho was very possessive. Tennessee Williams, being the horny guy that he is, he went to the A House and he met a guy who's just out of, it's 1947, so World War II had ended recently, and he met a sailor, an ex-sailor named Frank Merlo.
Oh, you even know the name. Great. Yeah.
Well, Frank became his probably most important lover ever. If there was such a thing back then as having a gay male partnership, that's what it was. So he met Frank Merlo here. So this is the thing about Provincetown, is it runs through all the currents of his life. And Frank Merlo, and he did what comes naturally. And I think Pancho wondered where he was, and he had found out that he had slept with some guy and tried to run him over with a car.
Okay, so this is where the attempted murder comes in.
Yes,
because that's another story going around, that there was an attempted murder, a murder attempt against Tennessee Williams when he was here.
Yeah, Pancho got really angry, and Williams was trying to hide from him and thought he had eluded him, but then I guess Pancho had another set of car keys and was looking for him, and then he saw Williams walking back toward the house from the Truro side, and then raced at him and then went into the ditch, and then followed him on foot. And it's said, I don't know if this is true because it's,
We only want facts. No.
Well, Williams' memoirs are notoriously unreliable. They're fact-ish, but so he said that he hid underneath a pier and clung to the underside of a pier to elude him.
Were there any piers on
the East End? There were.
That end of town back then?
There were, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because nowadays we don't really have piers at that.
Well, some houses are still have them, but most of them are washed away since the 40s.
Well, we're glad that he survived. Any other major attempts on his life when he was here?
Not that I know of.
Okay. But he was here in the 1940s at a time when there were a lot of other big names coming here. Now, back then they were not big names, but nowadays we look back on these people and we think that they're some of the biggest names in American art, literature, theater. Since I'm a painter, and I think in terms of, the visual artists, back in the 40s, that's when a lot of the abstract expressionists were coming here. The Jackson Pollocks, the Mark Rothkos, Hans Hofmann had been here for a while. There were a lot of very important artists in town. Did he have any connection with them? Was he a loner, or was he sort of mixing with this group of artists and creatives?
Well, you just named some people that he hung with. So
Okay.
he was more interested in the avant-garde. He was more interested in what was pushing forward arts and letters in the world. He really didn't hang with actors. He wasn't here to put on plays. He was here he was here to drink and fuck.
Uh-huh.
Can I say that?
Yes, you can.
But he was also here to write. As we know, Lee Krasner was here working in Hans Hofmann's studio, and she was here in 1940. And the two dancers that he was living with were modeling for Hans Hofmann. So, of course, there was an overlap in the people that they knew. So Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner were on the beach with Williams when Kip broke up with him, when Kip broke his heart.
Which one is Kip?
Kip is the person he fell in love with, living in Captain Jack's Wharf, one of the dancers.
Okay, that's one of the dancers. Okay.
Yeah. They were there. I don't know if it was a bonfire or if they were just hanging out on the beach, but Kip rode Tennessee Williams' bike to the beach and said, "I need to talk to you, Tenny." He balanced on his handlebars, and Kip pedaled back to town and told him that he couldn't see him anymore. And he was devastated. And he blamed the woman. He blamed the girl that Kip was with. And it was a huge scene, but it changed him forever.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 1940. He also mentioned a drag show at the White Whale in 1940. So I guess he was taking part in the local nightlife.
He was in drag?
No, he mentioned.
Okay.
Well, he said we had a drag at the White Whale.
Oh.
So I don't know how that wording maybe.
That could also be smoking.
I think
no.
I'm pretty sure he was hanging out with
okay.
All of
hanging out with the drag artists.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also in 1940, this is kind of a sidebar. He pedaled 40 miles to Dennis to meet Tallulah Bankhead, and of course that relationship was a lifelong one. She starred in 2 of his plays, and he and Tallulah Bankhead knew each other quite well.
Mm-hmm.
In 1941, he hung with Fritz Bultmann, who he met in Provincetown, and
a painter.
And Fritz actually stayed in his New York apartment for a while. And also in 1941, this is interesting. I don't know if you've heard of Valeska Gert.
No, I don't know that name.
She was a German expat who left, during the rise of Nazism and came to the United States, and she ended up in Provincetown, and she was what we will call now a performance artist, a cabaret but very, very unique performance artist, singer, and she had this place called the Beggar's Bar. So Tennessee Williams worked there, I guess, for a very short time, and would read poetry and then beg for tips. But I think he was fired because he didn't share them.
Okay.
Anyway, Valeska Gert was a performance artist in town in 1941. He also befriended Oliver Evans, who was a poet, a professor, and an essayist in New Orleans here. And then, of course, in 1944, the painter Karl Kneiths, he was living at 8 in the cabin on with writer Harold Norse. So These were the kinds of people that he was involved with. They were usually writers, a lot of visual artists. He was very interested in visual art. He was very interested in poetry, not so much in theater.
But that's what he was writing.
He was, but again, he considered himself a poet, and he was trying to break through to something new. Maybe your listeners think of The Glass Menagerie or Streetcar Named Desire as very old-fashioned plays, but at the time they were absolutely groundbreaking. It's writing in a kind of a new expressionist sort of way, a non-linear way. The Glass Menagerie is told through a narrator, and it wasn't, tidy drama. Streetcar Named Desire put female sexuality on the stage for the first time. It was incredibly daring. What he was doing at the time was we have to remember was on the cutting edge. He fit right in here at Provincetown.
Yeah, because we're on the cutting edge of everything here. Now, I will show my ignorance here because literature and theater is not what I know the most about. But is there an overlap between what we call the Beat Generation and Tennessee Williams?
Yes, he knew Bill Canastra, and Bill was an early Beat Generation figure. He wasn't a poet himself, but he was this wild man, and he was mentioned by Jack Kerouac and Ginsberg's Howl. So this was something. He was very beautiful, of course.
They have to be.
Exactly. So I know he had kind of an overlap with those sort of people, and he was in New York. He was cognizant of what was going on.
One thing that's interesting with my own life story is that Jack Kerouac, his family comes from my general area of Canada.
Mhm.
Growing up, in my class, I had a girl called Julie Kirouac. So the name still exists in my area. So I was actually reading up on him, and his father was born about an hour and a half from where I was born. Different province. I'm born in New Brunswick. He was born in Quebec, but there's a border there. Anyway, so it's not relevant, but still, it's an interesting fact that Jack Kerouac, his family's from my general area of Canada. And I saw that he had spent time here in Provincetown as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why do you think that it's been 80 years and more in Provincetown, we're still talking about Tennessee Williams? Why did he leave such an impression on the place?
This is a tough question to answer because I don't know that the average person in Provincetown is really thinking about Tennessee Williams.
Well, I can tell you, I'm Canadian. I spent nearly all of my 20s and 30s living in Europe. I came back to America in my late 30s. So I'm not necessarily deeply knowledgeable about American literature. And when I came to Provincetown, that's when I sort of started noticing the name Tennessee Williams being mentioned often. I hadn't noticed him as part of a regular conversation or writing before, but here it seemed to be a prominent name.
I'm the most biased person to ask this question to because I came to Provincetown because of Tennessee Williams. I was asked to direct a play in 2006, The Parade, and I never left, essentially. So my association with Provincetown is through Tennessee Williams. But I think it's through story. I think it's the fact that there's a picture of him in the A house, and yet, anyone who goes into the little bar is going to notice it. And if you're curious enough to see who that naked man in the dunes is,
he's naked in that picture.
You'll notice that it's Tennessee.
I guess I haven't been to I haven't been to the little bar now.
I also think that it's because of who he is, his stature. He changed American theater. He kind of was American theater for a while. So if he were any less of a figure, perhaps it wouldn't be a topic of conversation. People still talk about Eugene O'Neill, and I think one of the reasons that Eugene O'Neill is still synonymous with Provincetown is because they called their playhouse in New York the Provincetown Players, or the Provincetown Playhouse. So they took the plays that were workshopped here and they brought them to New York for a wider audience. Williams didn't have that advantage, but so the fact that his name is still synonymous with Provincetown, I think, is a testament to the stories that have been told about him, but also from the Tennessee Williams Festival, quite frankly.
Yeah,
the last 20 years, we have been trying to change the reputation of Tennessee Williams and throw focus on his time here, but also on his later work.
So tell us about the history of the Tennessee Williams Festival.
It was started in 2006, but
So you were here for the first year.
I directed the very first performance of the first play, which was a world premiere,
Hmm.
Williams play, and I'm very lucky to be able to do that. About a year and a half before it started, the Provincetown Theater on Bradford Street was just opened, and it was a former garage where they fixed cars, and they turned it into a theater. And that was Alex Ritchie, who is an incredible philanthropist in town, and she and Jerry Scally and Patrick Falco uh, asked a scholar and director named David Kaplan, who was coming up to Provincetown, can you help us with an idea to make a festival to draw attention to this new theater? Long story short, they decided on a Tennessee Williams Festival and prepared for about a year to launch this festival, in which time David did a ton of research, wrote a book called Tennessee Williams in Provincetown, which is a really great volume. Pick it up. It's really easy to quick read, and it has all the information that you need
It's a
about.
booklet, Tennessee Williams in
Yeah,
Provincetown by David Kaplan.
right.
Actually, when I was doing research for this episode, it popped up a lot on the internet, so it's
Yeah,
available.
and it's really concise and focused on Provincetown. And David Kaplan, still to this day, is the curator of the Tennessee Williams Festival and a good friend of mine. So I owe a lot to him, and I think Tennessee Williams owes a lot to him as well, because the festival's mission is to sort of shed a light on Tennessee Williams' avant-garde spirit. So we, of course, have done the big names. We've done Streetcar and we've done Glass Menagerie, but also Tennessee Williams wrote about 100 plays, and many of them, about 70 of them, were short. So we've done some very unknown plays, and we premiered 12 new plays that were posthumous. And I think that the legacy of the festival has helped reshape his reputation worldwide. Scholars like Annette Sadik, who researched Williams' late plays, and Thomas Keith, who was an editor, who was Tennessee Williams' editor at New Directions Publishing, they were absolutely instrumental in helping us with the relationship with the University of the South, who holds the rights to all of Tennessee Williams. The festival has hosted upwards of 4,000 artists,
Oh, that's a lot.
technicians, and staff in the
That's
last
the
20
last
years.
year.
Yeah. Theater companies from all over the country, from, Boston to LA, from Mississippi to Minnesota, and international companies from 5 continents, South Africa, Ghana, Hong Kong, Turkey, Russia, New Zealand. I brought a play from New Zealand, Mexico, all over Europe. So even England.
Mm-hmm.
So well, I'm very proud of the legacy that I helped. I was the executive director from 2007 to 2018, and then I consulted in 2019 and 2020. So I have a long history with Tennessee Williams in Provincetown.
And that's why I invited you.
Yeah,
Now, from what I know, this is the last year of the Tennessee Williams Festival in 2025. So, what do you think the relationship between Provincetown and Tennessee Williams will be as we move forward from this?
I think it's one of legacy. We helped reframe and resuscitate the reputation of Tennessee Williams. And what I mean by that is Williams in 2006 was sort of thought of as the guy who wrote Streetcar Named Desire, but that's where it ended. But because we did some of his unknown plays and many of the ones we premiered got published, somehow the reputation of Tennessee Williams we started to rethink. There's people said that he never wrote anything good after 1961, and that's just not true. He was just writing differently. He was looking for new forms. He was looking for new ways of expressing. He was not really concerned with what he had done before, and everyone wanted him to write another Streetcar. So when you look at these later plays, they have their own merit, and they just weren't like anything he had ever written. So that's what we focused on. And this little tiny spit of sand on the end of Cape Cod is responsible for helping reshape that legacy. We can be proud of that, because the town supported this festival. The town had a lot to do with the way that plays were done. We did them in bars and tents on the beach, front porches. We did them in theaters, of course, but some of the more memorable ones were done in hotel rooms or nightclubs. So we have kind of played everywhere in town that you can do a play.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what we've done here has changed the conversation about Tennessee Williams. So that's, to me, what Provincetown can claim. In addition to Williams writing some of his most well-known work here, I think we can say we have changed the conversation.
And this conversation before the festival, do you think it had stalled because he was addressing a lot of queer themes?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise that The Parade, which is an overtly gay play, it's about, a man in love with another man, was never performed in his lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Another play that was premiered at Shakespeare Theater, which I also worked at, it was overtly trans. So, he wrote gay characters in his lifetime. They just were never performed. So it took 66 years for The Parade to find its home, and it found its home where? Provincetown.
Yes, because we're not afraid of queer characters
No,
or
we're not.
queer stories here. We actually celebrate them.
Yes,
Yeah.
and there are another one, that the remarkable rooming house of Madame Lamond. If anyone wants to look that up, that is violent, and it's like Grand Guignol, and it's very dark and sadistic and gay. And there's this poor man who has to go around on hooks from the ceiling and is forced to perform sexual acts for his landlord's son, and it's really dark. Well, that we premiered here as well.
Okay. Well, yes, you probably had an audience for that
Yeah.
here. What year did he die?
1983.
So he lived from 19
11.
to 1983.
Yeah.
Okay, so he spanned pretty much the whole 20th century.
Mm.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. It helped me clear up a lot of facts and stories and rumors about Tennessee Williams that have been circulating around Provincetown forever. And I'm so happy that his name is linked with this town and that we can claim him as one of us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I am so glad to be here. If you ever want to talk about this again, I've left out hundreds of facts, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation with you.
Well,
thanks for inviting me.
We'll meet and we'll review all these facts.
Okay.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us.